Welcome to Opera San José Talks. This is Larry Hancock, General Director of Opera San José, and today I have with me Conductor Christopher Larkin and Stage Director Candace Evans of our upcoming production of Puccini's La Rondine. Each are making their Opera San José debuts with this production. So welcome, Candace and Christopher.
Thank you, Larry.
So, by way of introduction, Christopher, Chris, you have a long list of national and international credits, including, among many others, the Washington National Opera, New York City Opera, Santa Fe Opera, Houston Grand Opera, Cincinnati Opera, Portland, and I believe you are scheduled to conduct Turn of the Screw at Oberlin and Don Giovanni at Edmonton this season. Did I get some of that right?
Most of that is correct, yes.
Well, if you have something to fix, speak now. Okay, and Candace.
Yes.
So in addition to stage direction, you are also an actress and choreographer.
This is true.
And I was particularly fascinated that you have played Lady Macbeth.
I have. I actually did that in the Caribbean, among other places, right after a hurricane. And we flew across the Bermuda Triangle. So I was a little anxious. I thought, this might not be the piece to take over the Bermuda Triangle.
Looking at you from across the room, I wouldn't be surprised that you sang Ariel.
Oh, that's very kind. That's very, very kind.
So, but Lady Macbeth, that's pretty scary stuff. Okay, so anyway, your recent assignments in opera as a stage director have included Teatro Colón, the largest opera house in the Western Hemisphere, Argentina, Merry Widow for Dallas Opera, Carmen for Eugene Opera, Madison Opera, Eugene Onegin for Madison Opera, not Eugene Opera. And I know you just returned from a summer in Italy.
I did.
What's going on? It was miserable in Italy this summer.
It was a little toasty. Yes, yes. The gelato was particularly succulent this summer. Now, I've been there, I guess, 3 of the last 4 summers. This year was Don Giovanni at Teatro Petrarca, which is an ancient, fabulous theater in Arezzo, which has been in chaos for years, empty, ignored, owned by 10 Italian families. You can imagine getting the agreement on how to remodel it was a bit of a challenge, but it is now, and it was absolutely lovely.
Glad to hear that. That's fun. And Christopher, you also were in Italy.
I was. My weather was perfect, actually. I was very far up north, up in the Dolomites.
Oh.
There were really only 2 or 3 days that were incredibly hot. The rest was just spectacular with the Young Artist Program, Music Academy International.
All right. Oh, and I left off some things, Candace. Arizona Opera, Palm Beach Opera, and Florentine Opera.
It's true. And Fort Worth, where I did a production with Maestro Larkin. We had a grand time doing
I didn't know
Jake
you guys
Heggie's.
worked together.
We have before, yes.
We did Jake Heggie's 3 Decembers. Something very different from this, but equally interesting.
It was marvelous.
Yeah, it was a great show.
I've never seen it.
It's an incredibly theatrical piece, very powerful stage piece.
Very tender and very, I think, personal for a lot of people because it deals with family dynamic, and who doesn't have that?
Well, Candace, the fact that you're also a choreographer as well as a stage director and that you are an actress yourself, that changes the dynamic of what can happen in a staging rehearsal with opera singers. The public doesn't really understand that opera singers don't get the kind of training that an actor gets.
No, not at all.
Opera singers are in a studio with their voice teacher, and that's kind of it. If they're lucky enough to be in a university setting or a setting that does have opera productions, they'll get training from a stage director for that role in the period they choose to set it.
Correct.
So if they're doing an 18th century opera in 20th century clothes, they won't learn how to move in a gown with paniers. If they're doing a 19th century opera in the 20s, which you may see, they're not going to understand what to do with hoops underneath their skirts.
Exactly.
And so so they end up getting cast in roles because we have had a 7-minute audition. That's something else that people probably don't understand. I'll go to New York once a year, and I hear singers here once a year with other members of the artistic staff. We'll sit and listen to singers. They get 7 minutes apiece. I'll hear perhaps 100 singers in 3 days.
Right.
It's kind of normal. Yeah, and so you have to have a very quick shorthand of, I put 1 star, 2 stars, or 3 stars, you know. That's all I get. And I write a little, as they come into the room, I'm writing tall, slender, very quickly, just little things you need to remember when you look back later, because the photograph isn't going to tell you all that, right?
Exactly.
And you get 7 minutes. You get maybe one aria and part of another, and that's all you're going to get. And you have to make a decision about this person, and you don't know if they can walk or sit.
It's always a surprise when I arrive at staging rehearsal. It's like, all righty, let's see who's got what ammunition.
That's it.
Who can do what, who needs help or support or direction in different ways.
I just lucked out with school. My undergrad, of course, I was never a professional performer, but in undergraduate school, I worked with a famous British actress who helped me mostly in Shakespeare. And then in graduate school, I was directed by Irene Dallas.
And doesn't get much better than that.
And you don't step your foot wrong with Irene Dallas. I mean, she was that German school, where on every beat of the measure, you knew what you were doing in that measure, and you better do it in that measure. And if you asked her for a motivation, she would laugh in your face. That's your job. No, she ain't going to tell you. She's the stage director. Be down here on this beat, and then you had to figure out why you were going down there. And young singers need that help, and I've watched you do it. Fabulous.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think you mentioned my background, and I think it's really implicit in all of that training. I started in ballet when I was a little girl because I liked the tutus and the pink shoes. But it stuck, and I loved it. And then I started to study opera and carried on both of those tracks along with acting all through college. But the difference, I think, that I learned, of course, is understanding. Having worn the shoes or sung the notes, I understand the physicality of it. But in music, so much of the training is so this is right and this is wrong, and that's certainly true in ballet as well. In theater, there is no such thing. It's all kinds of gray. And so I think that's the thing that I feel, the special permission that I want to give to singers is in the world of stage direction, there's no wrong choices. There's just maybe better or more informed, but the freedom to explore what that character thinks or does, and then how that informs how they move. And then that goes hand in glove with what the music needs them to do. And one informs the other. It's a constant dialogue, I believe.
And Puccini especially, the music informs everything. It's something that we get to, and I teach a little opera history course every year. And when we get to Puccini, I tell them, this is not an opera appreciation course. We're not covering Puccini because he didn't lead to anything. But that's really not true. He didn't lead to anything in opera, but he led to film scores. Puccini basically invented the film score because the actions on stage are expressed through the orchestra.
I always tell the singers it's like a river. Just get on and float. If you don't know what to do, listen to the score. It's gonna give you everything you need.
Especially in Puccini, if you try to go up against it, and I've seen stage directors try to go up against the music in Tosca. Right? They decide we're not going to put the candlesticks down now, right? Or what we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. Well, you're just wrong. Because Puccini's doing it.
It's all part of the score.
That's right.
Yeah, there are 80 people in the pit doing it right
Everybody
now.
in the audience goes, well, that's where they were supposed to go.
And that's, if I get very creative stage directors, I tend not to want them for Puccini. Because the minute they decide to deviate from what's required in that score, everybody looks like an idiot on stage, like they forgot their staging. That's what it looks like.
Well, it's tremendously helpful to a stage director to have that sort of composer. I love to do outre modern work too, but it's a very different use of my mind and imagination.
I think outre modern needs a score that is the same.
Well, I wouldn't mind it. It's sort of nice to have road signs.
Yeah, the music coming out of the pit, the audience knows what to expect. If you're hearing Lully, I don't know that I want to see stiletto heels and,
I'll take that on as a challenge. You ask me back. We'll try it.
Maybe we'll do platé.
Okay.
So, Christopher, the same thing as I'm watching with with you. I sit there and I hear you make, because we often stop in the middle of a staging rehearsal and you have a little music rehearsal. The singers literally come down and sit in chairs in front of you and you give them a little guidance. Coming just off of Mozart, Così, it's pretty, I mean, you don't take a lot of freedom. It's not like Chopin, right? You don't take a lot of freedom in Mozart. You pretty much get it done within the framework of where the beats fall.
Right.
But with Puccini, I've seen you telling them quite the opposite.
Well, with Puccini is extremely hard to conduct. This one, in some ways, is a little easier than something like Bohème or Tosca. It's just in a different style. It is very different for Puccini, this particular piece. But Puccini has so much flexibility in it, not just what's on the page, but what isn't on the page, you know, when singers need the time to get up over the top in the high part of their tessitura. And also the little, you know, he'll write accelerando, allegando, poco ritardando, a tempo, within a 4-measure phrase.
Yeah, exactly. So, he gives you 5 tempos in 4 notes.
Right. And it's all, as you mentioned, it's all dramatically motivated. It's there for a reason. Everything. And whenever I give a musical note, I usually try to back it up with a dramatic reference behind it. Say, this is why this needs to move here. This is why this retard is here. Because you're saying something for the second time, or like in the end of Act 1, Magda sings Ti amo. And then she sings it a second time, and Puccini just puts a little dash over the T the second time. So she says, I love you. And she says, I love you. Right? So it's just those tiny little details, but everything is there for a reason, you know. So the challenge is to make it sound as flexible and as nuanced as it can be, and at the same time have a certain predictability, so I know exactly what the singer's going to do, and the singer knows exactly what I'm going to do. So I try to be physically very much the same every time I conduct, especially in Puccini. If I say I'm going to subdivide this bar, I'll subdivide this bar, because that's what they're expecting, and it helps us recreate what we've talked about in the rehearsal room. It's also great to work with someone like Candace, who gives me that time to have people come down and say, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have to fight for that. Usually in this world, we get 2 days of musical rehearsal and then 4 weeks of staging rehearsal, and then we're on the stage. But Candace is very good about providing me time to clean up some things.
And Opera San José provides a whole week of music rehearsal.
That's right.
It's really a luxury and a glorious one.
Yep.
It's as it should be, you know, because it respects the piece.
Yeah, nice relaxed rehearsal process.
No, I've really loved working with Chris. What he's saying about his support of the singers is palpable. You see them relax when they're working with him. They feel secure. They know where he's going. They can predict it, and they're never out there alone. And that's huge.
And you have the score so perfectly memorized. You're throwing words out. Anytime a singer gets stuck for a text, you're right there
true.
with it.
Maestro and repetiteur. Yeah.
This is my first rondine too. This is I've not conducted this piece before, so it's been interesting for me to discover it and work through it.
And that brings me to something. Rondine. If you pick up a book that's more than 10 years old, it will tell you that the opera is not performed. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
Stretch. Yep.
And suddenly, in the 21st century, it was starting in the 90s, but in the 21st century, suddenly, it's in a lot of places. I actually highlighted where it's been performed in a great long list, which would bore everybody to death. But quite suddenly, major important companies have in the past, within 10 years, have been done 2 or 3 or 4.
This is my second.
Productions.
We did one at Dallas Opera.
Yeah, it's our second.
I loved it immediately. I mean, it's a very different piece, and there are smatterings of, there's bits of his other work that you feel little echoes of it.
Well,
but I don't find
Puccini
that disparaging.
opera.
I find that interesting. It's his milieu.
Listen to
Mozart.
Mozart.
Little signifiers.
You begin an aria singing one phrase, and the next thing you know, you've stepped into another aria singing what you think might be the next phrase. Every composer, I think, worth his salt, has a signature. Mm-hmm. Yeah. From Bach to Beethoven to Schubert. It just doesn't matter. You hear 3 measures of Schubert, and you know that's Schubert. If you're smarter, you know which piece of Schubert it is. But composers do have a stamp. They do have a use of phrase, like Brahms, you're always getting a falling minor third. I mean, it's just typical. The Mahler, who you don't have to hear but 3 chords, and you know you're listening to Mahler. And that's because no matter what you listen to Mahler, you're going to hear that again. So yeah, Puccini is clearly Puccini, and we kind of, sometimes it feels a little strange because you hear what you think of as Oriental sounds, and you think that he's borrowing from his own Madame Butterfly, but the real truth is, no, he's borrowing from Debussy, because these are just parallel chords.
Everything old is new again, huh?
Yeah, and Debussy borrowed it from the Japanese because he heard the music in Paris, right? So these things, but I have been reading a little bit about, as we all know, Opera San Jose just did this World War I opera, Silent Night, and so I got to be reading a lot about that. And Puccini's wrapped all around World War I with this rondine. He's commissioned first by Vienna in 1910 or something, and then boom, we're in a war. No, 1913, and then boom, in 1914, we're in a war with guess who? The very country that he got the commission from, and everything all fell apart. And then that Puccini absolutely refused to support the war effort. He thought it was hideous. It's the end of civilization. He was horrified, and he would not support it. And the same day he discovered they were in war, he also discovered that his only son had signed up. And he was utterly distraught, and he would do nothing to help. And he lost all his friends, and Toscanini chief among those. Wouldn't even talk to him. And suddenly, across Europe, all his work is being denigrated. And here he's in the middle of writing this rondine. And when it finally did come out in Monte Carlo, a neutral country, nobody cared. They just slammed it and said it was cheap operetta. Well, it was never an operetta, never intended to be an operetta. It's just clearly all wrong. So this opera in particular just got slammed because of circumstance, I think, more than anything else. And I guess also at the time, I hear, Christopher, you can correct me, that the waltz was really thought to be a form for popular music. And this thing is full of waltzes.
It is full of waltzes, which makes it very different from almost any other Puccini opera. But he was writing for Vienna. It was commissioned by Vienna, and that was where he intended to do the premiere until the war intervened. So I think that was a deliberate choice on his part. And they're beautiful waltzes. They really are. There's such beautiful melodies. He just has a way of writing them that's very special.
Well, and it's a romance, and that's sort of the classic combination, Or maybe we attribute it to that now. Maybe we're conditioned. I don't know. But it just makes you feel yummy when you hear them.
Yeah. There's also a little polka in there.
I hear there's a tango somewhere. I haven't identified the tango yet. And a foxtrot. So he was using current dance forms. Yeah. But so did Mozart use current dance. So did Bach, as I recall.
Yep.
There are whole suites of them in Bach. That doesn't make them cheap. And I think it was just that they were so angry with him that he didn't support the war, that's why they were slapping him around. So we read this stuff, and we're not able to read into it the context of Puccini's refusal. He did give great deal of money to military veterans after the war. The proceeds from Tosca in Paris were all given to war veterans. He stepped up big time after the war to help the damage, but he was not going to help do the damage. So I understand that. I understand that point of view. I'm a flower child, right? So
well,
I
he
understand.
Wasn't a political, he certainly wasn't Verdi in that sense. He wasn't a politically motivated person, really.
Right.
He was too international.
Yep.
He was already all over the world. I mean, whatever Puccini wrote, it was next week in Buenos Aires and New York. So he was a very international personality. I mean, Girl of the Golden West sat in miles outside Sacramento, which is, I'm terrible. I've always wanted to do Girl of the Golden West just so I could hear the audience laugh when the guy says Sacramento, and then everybody cracks up.
True enough.
So anyway, what fun. Who are these people? We have all these people in this opera, and we have, I have to say, there's some, I'm going to show myself to be an ignoramus, so Chris, slap me hard. I feel like Act 2 of Rondine gave Puccini the chance to clean up Act 2 of Bohème.
Well, it's a lot longer. It's pretty complex. There's a lot going on in this Act 2, and it's very similar to Act 2 Bohème.
Yeah.
Without children, which is makes
Helpful.
life a little easier for some of us.
Yes.
Right?
It's not as bad as Carmen, where they have to linger until Act 3, and they're, you're like, oh my
That's
word,
right.
they're still there at 10:30 at night.
Right. It's an interesting act. It starts with a bang, as does Act 2 of Bohème. And then, we have these, as in Tosca, as in Bohème, we have the two different couples, Prunier and Lisette, as opposed to Magda and Ruggiero. And so that's often played back and forth between the two of them. The culmination of that is the beautiful quartet in Act 2, which I think many people recognize, even if they don't know where it's from. When they hear the tune, I'm sure they'll recognize it.
They recognize it from having seen an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical.
Yeah.
And he had to pay dearly for having stolen it.
That's right.
I've heard people, when we last did it, people came in and said, Puccini stole that from Andrew Lloyd Webber. I said, well, no, I don't think
maybe
so.
the other way around.
Having been dead a
Possibly.
long time.
There is a little Rodgers and Hammerstein in there, too, at one point that we've all has caught our ear. But, it's such a beautiful moment. And unlike Bohème, where he has Marcello and Musetta stay in their character, sort of eye-going. At this point, they all sort of really do fall in love for that extended period of the quartet, with the chorus joining in behind them. It's just an incredible moment.
It does rise up to, it's the only time Opera San Jose ever had to perform an encore.
Really.
And it was
See, now
opening.
you put the pressure on me.
It was the opening that we had never done it here. Nobody knew the opera here.
Yeah.
And on opening night, we got to that giant quartet, and then the chorus singing in behind them, and it just rose to this glory, right? I mean, it does. But there's more to go. The scene's not over.
No.
But the audience wouldn't stop applauding.
Oh, my.
They simply wouldn't
Well,
stop.
it does sound like the finale. It really does.
Well, we couldn't move forward. They would not let us move forward. They just continued to applaud until the conductor finally just said, go back. And of course, the orchestra, they have numbers to go back to, but everybody on stage was like, back to where?
A rewind.
Yeah, so when they heard the music, they said, oh, okay. And everybody scurried and took their places, and they
Right.
sang it all over again. We had to do that whole ensemble
Wow.
a second time. It's divine.
It really is.
It is spectacular. And it's sort of right in the smack in the midpoint of the opera. Sort of all builds up to there and then goes back in a different direction. That's when everyone thinks they're going to be in love forever. And
Yes, and they do.
do we need to do spoiler alerts here, or do we all?
We just shan't go there.
Said the stage director.
Life leads us in other directions, and stay tuned so you know what it is.
I don't feel so strongly about it as Candace does.
All right.
I do. We had a conversation the other day. I said, if someone said to you, that's the most divine movie, let me tell you how it ends, you'd be like, stop it. Don't tell me that.
Yes, but movies are ephemeral and you don't care about them. Operas, you will go
Ouch.
back
Ouch.
again and again and again
It's
and
true.
again.
It's true. I sort of like the idea that there's some of the uninitiated who want to experience it for the first time, who want to come and just let it wash over them.
The other beauty of Puccini is he knows when to bring a tune back. And this keeps reappearing, especially two more times at the very end of the act, after this big commotion between Rambaldo and Magda. Ruggiero comes back on, and then there's this underlying of the beautiful quartet in the background while they both sing over the top how much they love each other.
We should clue people in who don't know anything about this opera. It's set in the days of Scarlett O'Hara, big hoop skirts. It's in Paris. We have a gal who was a simple country girl, came to Paris, and this is backstory, doesn't happen in the opera. She comes to Paris, and she happens to be so pretty, and we're so lucky that our Magda is so pretty. And she discovers that there's another way to make a living than working in a shop.
We talked about this with some of the girls because at this point in time in our world, women have many more choices. But at that point, there were not a lot of choices. And if you wanted to elevate yourself and live in the city, you needed to find a protector. And that's what she did. Rambaldo is her protector. Magda, as you said, young and beautiful. But emphasis on young.
Yeah, and Rambaldo is not young and is well-to-do.
Extremely, and very, very machismo. It's, he is a man of his time and power.
Yeah, and she, at a party in the opening scene, there's a guy named Prunier who is a theatrical personality. He writes shows for stages, and he has invented a new character that he's about to figure out what she's going to be doing in a show, and her name is Doretta. And of course, she doesn't appear in the opera. She's just a character mentioned in a different play. And he's trying to write a piece of music for her to sing, and he gets partway through it, performing it for everybody at their command, and he said, "That's all I've written." And Magda says, "Let me finish it." And then we get the famous Canzone di Doretta, the Song of Doretta, that Kirita Kanawa, I think, made very, very famous because she introduced the high pianissimos on those high Cs. There's a funny story about that. Irene was seated with Leontine Price when they heard Miss Tikanawa do this the first time. And Ms. Price said, "Damn, now we're all going to have to do that."
That's brilliant. I love
We're
it.
all going to have to do it. Well, but and then Mr. Kano goes on to make one of the great recordings of the opera. What a voice! But at any rate, so we have her, this Magda, our principal female. She figures out that love, which is what this aria is about, is missing in her life.
It awakens old dreams
Yep.
before she embarked on this choice.
And so she suddenly makes a choice,
She says, "I'm going to go out for the night. What the heck?"
and she puts on her old clothes from when she was a shop girl.
And heads to the Club Boulier, a beautiful nightclub in Paris. Parallel to that, she has a lady's maid named Lisette, who is in Act One, and she's sort of the comic relief in a way, but also kind of a baseline of another way to approach life.
And a wiseacre.
And a wiseacre, exactly.
Spitfire.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really naughty little girl.
So, and unbeknownst to Magda, her maid is seeing Prunier on the side. He's sort of, I guess we could say, slumming it. He's not willing to admit to anybody that he's dating the maid, but love being love, it happens, and there you are.
And so off they go, and they all meet accidentally. Here they all are, not anybody knowing anybody else is going, but there they all are. And there's a young man who comes to visit a friend of his father who happens to be Rambaldo, the guy who takes care of Magda. And so he has arrived, but she doesn't see him because she's having her fortune told. So she ends up meeting him also at Bouillet. And there's a little connection, and the connection blooms.
Exactly.
And it comes to its fullest flower in that spectacular quartet.
There's also a wonderful moment in Act Two where Lisette, in Magda's absence, has gone into her closet and chosen a really swell dress. She's borrowed it for the night, as it were. And she arrives at the club wearing Magda's dress, and Magda sees the dress and the maid, and Lisette, the maid, sees Magda in tatty clothes, and there's a moment of, well, kind of a level playing field between the girls.
And they're each in disguise, and the guys, and Magda really doesn't want it known.
No.
That she's there. Whereas Lisette really doesn't need it to be known that she's there by Magda. So she's caught in the act.
In her clothes.
Yeah,
We
in
were
her
joking.
clothes.
It's kind of like an I Love Lucy episode at that point. The hijinks of four people.
Yeah. It's all charming. And then, of course, we get to go for the Act 3, the last act. We go to Marseille and the French Riviera, where Ruggiero, who is the tenor that she meets at Bouillet's, and they have had this idyllic summer of love.
And you're not going to tell the ending.
No.
Stop.
And there are so many. Which one? Which one do we tell?
And isn't that an interesting point?
Yeah.
Puccini really dithered on this one. How to end it.
Yeah. And I don't like the later choices. There are 3 choices. There's the original choice, which is what we're using. And then there are 2 later revisions, and I don't like either of the 2. And I especially don't like it when modern stage directors decide to have one or the other of them kill themselves at the end. It's not that kind of story. It doesn't rise to that level. This is a love affair. It's not fate. It's not Carmen, where he's going to have to kill the woman before, because it's nothing
It's
like
kind of
that.
refreshing, the opera where the woman does not die at the end.
That's why nobody
Maybe that's
goes.
why I like it. Oh, no.
I have a theory. I figured it out. If the woman dies and the guy is really sorry, everybody loves that opera.
Oh, dear.
But if the guy dies and the woman is really sorry, nobody cares.
I don't think I like that theory.
And if nobody dies, nobody cares at all.
Well, we could have an exit poll on that. I'm not sure.
Well, The Marriage of Figaro has done well. And nobody dies. Così fan tutte does really well, and nobody dies.
Also, people dressing up in other clothing. That's
Always a thing.
Well, that's from Shakespeare, you know. It's just so standard. And we don't have this at all in the opera of a woman being mistaken for a man, like we do in Shakespeare, which is over the top a bit in Shakespeare. But you know, the truth is, if people didn't wear makeup and wore their hair the same, it's a lot easier to mistake a woman for a young man than you might guess. A 16-year-old boy and a woman can be mistaken for each other.
And this is what Shakespeare did, because he had to.
And also because it was true then, because women didn't get to, unless they were prostitutes, they didn't wear makeup.
No, and women weren't allowed on the stage.
Yeah.
So.
But it is a mistake that could be made, but we don't see it today because women do color their faces. And so it's young men do go through a period when they're not all that masculine. It's a little more androgyny going on, getting out of childhood into adulthood. And as 14, 15, 16, the right kind of haircut, and you could get confused at a glance from a distance. I mean, so, but it's a little different when they become lovers. That's a Baroque problem. Well, does anybody have anything special they want to say about Rondine that we haven't talked about, or about Puccini?
Well, I was just thinking it's probably one of the few operas where you hear an aria sung by a tenor and then the same aria sung by a soprano, even though Prunier doesn't finish it all the way, as you know. He sings almost the entire aria, and then Magda sings it again and puts on her own spectacular ending. So that's a little unusual.
We get to see it in reverse in Bohème.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, reverse, when she sings, do you remember when we met?
Yeah.
And she sings what he said to her.
Patches, yeah.
Which is heartbreaking, Christ. But this is not. This is happy. That's not heartbreaking.
There's so many beautiful moments in this piece, I think. You know, there's moments of incredible stillness when, in the third act, when he writes to his mother and asks for her permission for them to get married. And he sings this beautiful little arioso, I guess you call it. It doesn't have a full stop. There's no real, set tenor aria in this piece, for applause, whereas Magda has a couple where there's a possibility. It's just this, he says, tell me that you'll follow me to my house, the garden around it and the hill out front and perhaps we'll have a child one day. And it's so lightly orchestrated, just like solo viola and then solo flute and solo cello and then a couple of clarinets. It's, I just think, a heartbreakingly beautiful moment when you see his vision of what he would like their life together to be like.
It's exquisite. I was talking to our tenors about that the other day, and I said, what I find interesting, like you just said, it's the first time he's open in that way, but it's because he's on country turf. He's not in Paris. He's not out of his element. He is, in essence, near home, and I think that might be part of why he's heart open and full of wishes.
And he sees that she would be in place there.
Which is also really pertinent because, as you said, she was a country girl. Now she's out of Paris and returning to the thought process of what she had as a young woman. They're both away from the temptations of Paris.
And perhaps we'll have a little child. So.
I also have this real feel from Prunier in particular, but also Lisette and their circle. I grew up in the country. We had cattle and horses and orange groves, and I'm from Florida, so it was a completely different thing. And I just got plucked up by accident out of that and given a scholarship to go to university as a pianist. Completely unexpected. I wasn't even applying. I just got it. So I went to actually 2 different universities. And so I went off to school and then got knocked into a different ballpark. And I've always been sensitive to people who think that their city is so sophisticated that you could never be happy outside of it. And I think the whole opera of the Tender Land, the Copland opera, is based on that assumption that there's no way to be happy outside of New York. New York is the only place, the island specifically of Manhattan. You can be happy there, but you can't be happy in New Jersey. It's too far.
Oh, funny.
You can't be happy on Long Island unless you're really rich and your name is Gatsby. You can only be happy in Manhattan. And it's true in San Francisco, and it's true in Paris. I spend time in those cities. I don't spend time in many other cities, but it is just really presumed that if you're outside those places, you cannot be happy because you won't have access to life.
Mm-hmm.
Quite the opposite. I had a country upbringing as well in Wisconsin. And I think you're exposed to a lot more life when you're outdoors and with animals. It's sort of the more true form of life.
Yeah, you see the whole thing, the whole gamut
indeed.
of how they're conceived and how they're butchered.
Yes,
you
right.
see the whole thing.
A to Z.
Yeah, my first pet was a pig. Who became a hog, who became pork chops. Okay.
I think we're talking Charlotte's Web here.
So, but there is a strange presumption that you can't be happy, that nobody reads books outside a major city, that nobody has an appreciation for culture outside a major city. And it's just really...
ridiculous.
Yeah, just wrong-headed. It's just wrong-headed. Because I'm right now considering in some years, I don't know when, but in some years from now, I'm going to have to retire. I'm getting the right age. I have to be thinking about these things. And it's my presumption that I'll go back to my hometown and live there.
Many people do.
And everybody is saying, oh no, Larry, you couldn't possibly. Who would you talk to? And I think, wow. So there is that whole thing with Prunier and Lisette, who have a problem with Magda inventing a new life for herself.
Well, and Prunier wants to improve Lisette and bring her up in the world so she can be sort of a Pygmalion story.
Well,
He's
actually,
going to
so
remake
that
her.
he doesn't have to be embarrassed to have her on his arm.
There is that too, but no amount of dressing her up will change her spirit and style.
I had a piano teacher once who got all upset with me because I always practiced at the piano barefoot. And she says, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't get the country out of the boy. I was terrified that I would press the wrong pedal because I depended on the shape for which one it was. I hadn't had enough years of piano to be comfortable at the instrument at all. But anyway, we have a lot of social things going on in this show. We do have Prunier hoping to improve Lisette, and Lisette who ultimately says, I will not be improved.
And why should I?
Yeah. Take me like I am or leave me be. And
I think that's a really big deal in this opera. It's the essence of who you really are is shown to all of them at moments. There's glimmers of self-awareness and what your dream is, and does that work? I was asked for a few words before I arrived here, and I said my main thought would be the road not taken. We all wonder which way we turned and what that means and what the implications are.
And speaking of being authentic, for me, that's exactly what Così fan tutte is about.
True.
It's about being authentic. And at the opening of Così, nobody is authentic. Well, Alfonso and Despina, they are themselves. But the two boys and the two girls, they are not authentic. They're acting for each other. They're behaving the way they think the other person thinks they ought to behave in this situation. They're not even considering what they actually feel. They're just reflexively doing what they think is expected, the girls and the boys. And that stays true right up until into the second act.
Isn't that a reflection of youth, though, when we all try to be part of a pack or walk the way that fashion says we should walk and dress that way? And, you know, when you finally get to the point that you go, don't really like that at all.
And it does take a while before you know what you like.
Mm-hmm.
That's true for all of us, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a while to know what you like. You have to have tasted a few flavors of ice cream before you know you like pistachio.
It's funny, when I arrived here, I began reading Great Expectations, which I just finished last night or the night before. And I somehow had missed it in high school. I love Tale of Two Cities, one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
I happen to have, as you can do now with Kindle, you have the collected works of Dickens in your hand. So I was looking for something to read, and I went back, and a lot of these themes are in there. You know, it's him trying to fit into another world and looking back and seeing how happy these people are in their own world back when things were so simple out on the marsh, and how good-hearted these people were, and how terrible he felt about the person that he'd become as a gentleman.
He does become a pretty bad guy.
He does.
He does.
And, you know, a lot of those same themes. I didn't plan it that way, but now that we're talking about it, it seems that it's very intertwined with sort of the backstory of Rondine. Well, it's also about love, I think, in all its various incarnations. Puccini had a pretty complicated love life himself. So I think it deals with different types of love, knowing what love is, knowing maybe thinking something you love isn't really what you love, or it's. I think there's a lot going on between those two relationships.
Absolutely.
Almost even more so than in Bohème with those two couples.
It's a little more complex.
It is a little more complex.
It's deeper.
With Prunier's involvement with Lisette, and in public he says, "Oh, I need a woman who's complex like Salome," and there's a little tiny orchestral quote from Strauss there. From
Wonderful.
He says Salome, a two-measure quote. And then, in fact, he's in love with the chambermaid, and the other beauty of Puccini is they end with this little love duet at the end of Act 1, where we hear their theme very, very slowly played. And later in the opera, whenever they're fighting or having trouble, you always hear that same theme. You won't hear it. It goes by so fast, and he'll write it in a completely different tempo. We hear it very, very slowly at the end of Act 1, but then he'll sneak it in somewhere underneath. And I think it's his way of saying, they're still in love. They still love each other.
Well, as they demonstrate.
Yeah.
I mean, they've broken up. No. What time do you get off work?
Right.
Very funny.
So there is love there, clearly. But he has, I bet Prunier is from no place special.
Oh, I quite agree.
And he's made it in the arts. He has some kind of a reputation in Paris. We don't know how big that reputation is, but he's hailed for his dramatic work.
But he's working so hard to always measure up and be applauded. There's a neediness there that's very palpable.
Yeah. So the opera is so richly complex. And I don't really ever think I understand an opera until I've seen it 4, 5, 6 times. And that I've learned that here because I see most everything many, many times, right? I mean, I'm at all the rehearsals in the theater, and then I'm at all the performances, and I have to do some research. I often do the translations of the scores. I often have to give lectures about these operas, and I might have to give 6 or 8 or 10 lectures about the opera or about the composer. So I find myself falling deeper and deeper in. But the truth is, here I am now in my late 60s. And I just really discovered Così this year.
Isn't that interesting?
And I've been involved in a great many Cosìs, one way or another. Mm-hmm. I designed the set for this one in a way. I mean, Stephen Kemp came in and cleaned up the design and made it wonderful, but it's left over from an old design of my own. And I did the translations. And I kind of knew it. I sang Ferrando as a kid. I would think that I would know it. But this year, I started studying the Enlightenment philosophers. And suddenly, it was a whole new work for me. Reading Descartes and then reading the first encyclopedists and Diderot and what he was hoping to accomplish, and Rousseau and what he was hoping to accomplish, and then having just recently read Dancing to the Precipice and Madame de Staël and a few of those things, it all came together in a completely different way. And I said, oh my God, I didn't know this. That's what this opera was about. It's the only thing the opera is about.
Too, it's where you are in your own personal path sometimes.
Well, I hadn't done those things before.
And people often ask me as a stage director in an interview, they say, what do you want the audience to take away? And I always say, that's not my business. My business is to tell the story, and depending on who you are and what your life experience is, if you're a woman who's recently fallen in love and you're seeing Romeo and Juliet, you're going to see it very differently than an older couple who maybe has lost a child. It's not my job. So we come at the operas differently throughout our lives, and that's the richness of it. Like a Shakespearean play, there's something glorious there for everybody, and it's their own personal thing.
Yep. And seeing it once, you don't necessarily find it.
No. You're not always ready,
Yeah.
It's not always a great production. There is that. It might be too facile or updated, that, something that obfuscates the real meaning of the piece. So it's worth sampling a lot.
Act 3 of La Bohème. I was always so bored by Don de Lieta. It was like, could you just tear off the Band-Aid?
Oh,
could you please just get this over with? Breaking up is so very hard to do. Just do it. You've nothing to be gained by this standing around. Just do it. Go back to your apartment. And then I was widowed. Mm-hmm. And she says, in the little table beside the bed is my prayer book and my little gold ring. Give them to the concierge to take to my room. And in my bedside table was my missal and my wedding band.
And there it is.
And I thought, somebody's going to have to carry me out of here. This isn't working.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. I mean, it's like this hidden treasure trove of messages for people in these works. That's why they endure.
Because they are universal, and it is true. Mm-hmm. And that's why so many of them have fallen away, because they weren't.
Right.
It's like films. They were producing them like films once upon a time, and they fall away because they don't contain anything. Merope doesn't contain anything. You haven't even heard the names of these Baroque composers because their works didn't contain those kinds of things, moralizing, preaching. But not the works that have floated up to the top 10 in the current repertoire. They are all filled with meaning. And that's why people can go back again and again.
I think people can come away from this opera with different perspectives too, because there is a certain ambiguity to the end of the piece, all of this things that happen. And I think maybe Puccini, because there's that ambiguity, is why he maybe tinkered with it, to make it somehow fall one way or the other.
To make it end instead of stop. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of operas end rather than stop. I mean, stop rather than end. But what we know is Magda adores him. Mm-hmm. She truly loves him. Otherwise, she wouldn't have walked, right? If she were after something. She wouldn't have run
away with him, no.
Yeah, no. She wouldn't have run away with him, nor would she have walked out on him. Mm-hmm. It's only because she loves him that she did both of those two things. And he adores her, but he's wet behind the ears. But he adores her, and he doesn't give a damn about what she did last week. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter to him. She's in front of him now. He wants her now. But she walks. So the love is towering, and the music is clearly, it's really, this is music about being in love, especially that Act 2 finale. That's magic. But indeed, just exactly what you said, Chris. There is more to it than we get to hear, and it makes it annoying in a way. We want to go, well, wait a minute, where's the sequel? What's the sequel to this? Well, I have announcement for both of you. You have to go into rehearsal.
Shoot. So fun relaxing with you.
Yeah, I just checked the time, and we have to say goodbye. So anyway, thank you both for being here in San Jose and making your debuts with this company. I hope you're having a good time.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. The facilities are breathtaking. For anyone who hasn't been to these offices, the costume shop, the prop shop, the rehearsal space, the practice room, the library, it is unbelievable. I've worked, as you reflected, many, many, many places, but this is an enviable situation.
Irene Dallas, whose portrait hangs on the wall, she made an Eden for opera production.
She did indeed.
Mm-hmm. It really is everything. For our theater, it's exactly the right everything you need. It's all spacious enough. It's unencumbered. It all works. Everything here works. If we can only manage to preserve it for future seasons, we're good for now. We're good for now. But we're all terrified of the future. I mean, anybody running an opera company.
Donations never hurt an artistic organization. Ever.
Yeah, from the dawn of
ticket
time.
sales or both.
Yeah.
Ticket sales. That's what I'm most worried about, because they've dropped nationally, and they haven't come back.
Yeah.
Well, this isn't a deeply known piece either, so anybody who's listening to this, encourage people, because it's Puccini, for heaven's sake, and it's glorious.
Yeah, it is
And we have
truly
some
beautiful.
excellent young singers, too. It's really a wonderful cast.
They are.
I have to say, I walk in there and am floored. We've had such good luck for the past 3 years. We have secured such fine singing.
I think you're good at that 7 minutes you related to.
Well, there are a bunch of us in the room, but we have had good luck, and my hat is off to Corey Dastur, artistic planning director for the company. When I came aboard, when they told me that I was going to become the general director, I had trepidation, and there was someone we were consulting with, and she took me outside. We went for a walk up the street, and she says, "Larry, who will have your back? Because you have had Irene's back all these years. Who's going to have your back?" And I thought, oh, hell, I don't know. So I knew I had to have a new music director, and then I created this artistic planning director position, because that, between a music director and artistic planning director, that's going to help in 100 ways, that when I have a failure of confidence, I can just look up and say, okay, guys, am I stupid? Is this a stupid idea? And they will tell me, because I've known them both for years. We were not close friends. We were not close friends. And I wouldn't even say that we become closer friends now. We're closer colleagues. We work together.
A vision, a shared vision.
We do. And the magic thing is, we almost never disagree at auditions for the first choice. It's always the same. It's always unanimous for the first choice for a role. Second choice, it's pretty close to most everybody feels okay. Third choice, now we're going to diverge. When you have to go down to the third choice, everybody's going to have their own idea. But we never disagree about the first choice. Not in 3 years, 4 years now. We have never disagreed about first choice.
Remarkable.
Well, you guys have to go to rehearsal.
We do.
Thank you for coming in.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. It's been a real treat.
I'm glad.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.